She had the resignation letter in her hand before she even knocked. 3 years, 3 years of early mornings and late nights, and learning the shape of a city that was never supposed to be home. 3 years of being excellent at a job she never fully understood why she had been given. And now she was done. She knocked once. His voice came through the door the way it always did, low, unhurried, like a man who had never once been caught off guard by anything. She pushed the door open. Jiang Minyu was standing at the window with his back to her. The Seoul skyline spread out behind him like something that belonged to him personally. She placed the letter on his desk and waited. He didn't turn around immediately. He never did anything immediately. That was one of the first things she had learned about him. He moved through the world like a man who already knew how everything was going to end. When he finally turned, he didn't look at the letter. He looked at her, just once. The way he always looked at her, like he was reading something she hadn't written yet. Then he said, "You can't resign from something you never applied for." She stared at him. The words landed wrong, not because they were threatening, but because somewhere underneath them was a meaning she couldn't locate, like a door she hadn't known was there. She opened her mouth, closed it, opened it again. He had already turned back to the window. "Mr. Jiang." "Close the door on your way out, Miss Mensah." She stood there for 3 full seconds. The letter was still in her hand. She looked at it, then at the back of him. Then she placed it on his desk, walked out, and closed the door so quietly behind her it made no sound at all. She had no idea what he meant. But by the end of that day, everything she thought she knew about her life in Seoul was going to collapse. If you have ever felt invisible to someone who was actually watching your every move, stay with me. This story was made for you. To understand what he meant, you need to go back. 3 years, Lagos. Zita Mensah was 28 years old and she had been carrying her family since she was 19. That was not a complaint. It was simply the shape of her life. Her mother, Mama Mensah, had been sick for 4 years. Not dramatically sick. Not the kind of sick that resolves quickly in either direction. The kind of sick that requires constant management, expensive medication, and a daughter who never stops calculating. Zita was a calculator by nature. She had graduated top of her class in business administration, spoken 4 languages before she was 25, and built a reputation in Lagos corporate circles as the kind of assistant who made her bosses look significantly smarter than they were. She was not bitter about this. She was strategic. So when the offer arrived personal assistant to the CEO of a private equity firm in Seoul, South Korea, she did not react emotionally. She read the contract 3 times. She researched the firm. She looked up the cost of living in Seoul against the salary being offered and ran the numbers twice. She called her mother's doctor and asked exactly how long the current treatment plan needed to continue and what the monthly cost would be for the next 2 years. Then she called the agency back and accepted. She was not running away from Lagos. She was running toward something. She just didn't know yet that something had already been running toward her. Seoul received her on a Tuesday morning in October. The air was sharp and clean in a way Lagos never was, and she stood outside the airport with her 2 suitcases and breathed it in like a decision she had already made peace with. A driver was waiting with her name on a card. She had expected a hotel. She had been told a hotel. The driver took her to an apartment building in Gangnam that had a doorman and a lobby that smelled like expensive wood, and she thought there had been a mistake until the doorman smiled and said her name. The apartment was on the 14th floor, fully furnished. Clean lines, warm lighting, a window that looked out over the Han River. Her name was already on the door, a small engraved plate, as though she had been expected for some time. She walked through each room slowly, closet space, a proper desk, a kitchen stocked with basics, everything expected, everything arranged. And then on the counter, Next to the electric kettle, a tin. She crossed the kitchen and picked it up. She read the label once, then again. Then she set it down and stepped back from it slightly as though proximity made it more impossible. It was her mother's tea. The specific brand Mama Mensa had been ordering for 15 years from a small shop on a side street in Yaba Market. Not available in any Korean supermarket. Not available online. She had checked once when she was traveling and found nothing. The only way to have this tin in this kitchen in Seoul was to have gone looking for it specifically and to have known exactly what you were looking for. She stood in that kitchen for a long time. She was not a woman who frightened easily, but her hand when she reached for her phone was not entirely steady. She called the agency. The woman on the other end said, "Mr. Jang arranged everything personally." Zita set the phone down. She looked at the tin. She looked at the Han River through the kitchen window. She looked at the tin again. Then she filled the kettle, made a cup, sat at the desk, and opened her laptop. She filed it in the back of her mind in a folder she did not yet have a name for, but the folder was already there, and it was already filling. She met Jang Minyu the following morning at 8 o'clock precisely. His office occupied the entire top floor of a building in Yonggu, floor-to-ceiling glass, a desk that looked like it had been designed by someone who understood power, and behind it, him. He was younger than she had expected. 35, though he carried himself like a man who had skipped several decades of uncertainty and arrived directly at authority. Dark suit. No tie. He was reading something when she entered, and he finished reading it before he looked up. He did not stand, did not smile. He looked at her once, that single complete look she would come to know well, and then he returned to his documents. He said, "Your hours are 8 to 5. Don't be late, don't be early." She said, "Understood, and if an emergency requires either." He looked up, a pause small but deliberate, then, "Use your judgment." She nodded and went to her desk. She would not find out until much later that in 4 years of assistance, 7 of them, he had never said that to anyone. Every previous assistant had been given a rigid protocol for emergencies, a specific number to call, a specific set of steps. Only Zita had been told to use her judgment. She didn't know this yet. She simply sat at her desk, organized his schedule for the week, drafted 3 correspondence letters he had left unfinished, and had everything waiting on his desk before 9:30. He came out at 10, looked at the documents, and went back into his office without a word. That was as close to approval as Jang Minyu ever got. The first week passed in a rhythm she adapted to quickly. He was demanding without being unkind, precise without being cold, or at least, the coldness was so consistent it stopped reading as personal. He expected excellence, and she delivered it, and they existed in a professional space that felt clean and functional and completely uncomplicated. Until Friday. She arrived at her desk that morning to find a small envelope placed exactly in the center. No name on the outside. Inside, a handwritten note, an address. A single line below it in English, "The chef trained in Lagos, order the agusi." That was all. She looked around the office floor. The other staff were at their desks, heads down, no one looking her way. She folded the note and put it in her bag and spent the entire day working with a kind of focused intensity that meant she was actively not thinking about something. At 5 o'clock she stood, gathered her things, and walked to the elevator. If this story is already pulling at something inside you, tap that like button right now. It tells me you want more stories like this, and I will keep them coming. She asked the secretary the following Monday, as casually as she could manage, whether anyone had access to her desk outside of office hours. The secretary, a quiet Korean woman named Bora who had worked on that floor for 6 years, looked at her with an expression that was very carefully neutral and said, "Nobody comes to your desk, Miss Mensah. The floor is locked after hours." A pause. "Only Mr. Jang has the override." Zita said, "Thank you, Bora," and went back to work. That evening, she went to the restaurant. It was a small place on a side street in Itaewon, easy to miss, the kind of establishment that survived entirely on the loyalty of people who already knew it existed. The moment she walked in, the smell hit her like a physical thing: palm oil and crayfish, and something her mother made on Sunday mornings. And she sat down at a corner table and ordered the egusi and ate the entire bowl in a silence that was halfway between homesickness and something she couldn't name. She did not look for him. He was not there. She had not expected him to be. But she thought about the effort, the specific, deliberate, unexplainable effort of finding a Lagos-trained chef in Seoul, of learning her tea brand, of writing the note in English so she would understand it, of placing it precisely in the center of her desk. She thought about all of it on the walk home, and then she filed it in that folder again, the one that still didn't have a name, and she went to sleep. 3 months into her time in Seoul, there was a senior manager on the floor named Park Jun-ho. He was the kind of man who had never once been challenged by a woman and had mistaken this for respect. In a morning briefing, 12 people around the table, Zita taking notes, he made a comment about her accent. Dismissive. The kind of small cruelty designed to establish a hierarchy in front of an audience. Minyu was at the head of the table. He said nothing. His expression didn't change. Zita wrote down the meeting minutes with the same clean precision she brought to everything and did not react. The meeting ended. 2 days later, Park Jun-ho's desk was empty, transferred to the Busan office, effective immediately. No announcement, no explanation offered to the floor. By the time people realized he wasn't coming back, there was nothing left to discuss. Zita noticed. She noticed the way you notice something that confirms a thing you weren't sure you were allowed to believe. She said nothing. She filed it. The folder in the back of her mind was getting full. Drop a comment right now. Did you see that coming? I read every single one and I always reply. It was a misfiled document that cracked the first wall open. 6 months in, sorting through a backlog of archived contracts, she found a folder that had been placed in the wrong section. She opened it to check the label and stopped. It was a job posting. Her job posting, the original listing for the personal assistant position she had been recruited for. The date at the top stopped her breath. It had been posted 3 months before her Lagos agency ever contacted her. She might have let that go. Recruitment pipelines ran in advance. That was not unusual. But she kept reading. The qualifications listed were specific in a way that job postings almost never were. Not general corporate experience, her specific degree, her specific language combination, her specific background in financial documentation. The posting described someone so precisely that reading it felt like reading a description of herself written by someone who had been watching her for a long time. Her hands were steady. Her face was steady. She was very good at steady. She closed the folder, replaced it in the correct section, and spent the rest of the afternoon being excellent at her job. That night in her apartment, she sat at her desk by the Han River window and thought about the tea, the restaurant note, the transferred manager, the job posting. She laid them out in her mind like documents on a table, and she looked at the shape they made together. Then she closed her laptop and went to bed because she was not yet ready to read what they said. Yuna arrived on a Thursday in the 4th month. Jang Minyu's cousin. She came from Busan with the energy of someone who had grown up watching powerful men and had learned to use that proximity like currency. She was beautiful in a deliberate way, the kind of beautiful that required an audience, and she walked through the office like she owned a percentage of it. She looked at Zita once, a long, measuring look that Zita returned with complete calm. Later that afternoon, Zita was filing in the archive room adjacent to Minu's office. The door was slightly open. She heard Yuna's voice, speaking in Korean, rapid and low, clearly not intended for anyone outside that room. She said, "So this is the one he built the position for." Minu said nothing in response, or if he did, it was too quiet to hear. Zita stood in the archive room with a folder in her hand. She had studied Korean for 8 months before arriving in Seoul. She understood every word. She finished filing. She straightened the folders. She walked back to her desk and spent the rest of the day being the best assistant Jang Minu had ever had. In the bathroom at 5:30, alone, she looked at her own face in the mirror for a long time. He built the position for her. The folder had a name now. She just wasn't ready to open it. She called her mother that evening the way she always did, every Thursday, without fail, regardless of how the day had gone. Mama Mensa sounded different, not different bad, different better. Her voice had more air in it, less effort. Zita asked how she was feeling. Mama said, "Much better, my daughter. The new doctor is very good. The treatment is working." Zita paused. New doctor. "Yes, they transferred me 3 weeks ago. Better hospital, better everything, much closer to home." Zita said, "Who arranged the transfer?" Mama said, "A foundation, private, Korean," they said. "They called the hospital directly. Everything is covered, the medication, the room, everything. They said it is anonymous." Zita sat down on the floor of her apartment hallway with her back against the wall. She said, "Anonymous." Mama said, "Yes, is everything all right? You sound strange." Zita said, "Everything is fine, Mama. I'm glad you're feeling better." She said good night. She put the phone down. She sat on the floor for a long time. A private Korean foundation, anonymous, covering everything. She thought about what Yuna had said. She thought about the job posting dated 3 months before she was recruited. She thought about the tea on her kitchen counter the morning she arrived. She thought about Park Junho's empty desk. Her mother's voice on the phone, "Much better, my daughter asterisk," played in a loop. She pressed her palms flat on the floor and breathed. The next morning she walked into his office at 8:15. He was at his desk already. He looked up. She said, "Is there something you want to tell me about my mother's medical care?" He held her gaze. A long moment passed. Then he said, "Your performance review is next Thursday." She stared at him. He returned to his documents. She stood there for 4 full seconds. Then she walked back to her desk. She did not cry, not then, but somewhere in the audience watching her walk back to that desk with her face completely composed, something broke open. Because they knew. They had already put it together. And watching her carry all of it alone, still excellent, still steady, still not knowing the full size of what she was standing inside, that was the thing that undid them. Chitty arrived in Seoul on a Saturday in month 7. He had been her closest friend since secondary school in Lagos, warm, easy, the kind of man who laughed at everything and meant it. He showed up at her apartment door with a weekend bag and a bottle of palm wine he had somehow carried from Lagos and the biggest smile she had seen since she left home. They spent the weekend doing everything and nothing. Street food in Myeongdong, the palace in Gyeongbokgung, long conversations over bad coffee that tasted like home because the person across from her felt like home. Chitty had been in love with her since they were 22. He had never said it directly. He had also never stopped. On Sunday evening, he took her to dinner and looked at her across the table the way he always looked at her and said, "Come home, Zita. You've done enough here. Come home." She looked at him for a long time. She thought about her mother's voice. She thought about a folder with a name she hadn't opened yet. She said, "Not yet." He nodded. He understood. He always understood. He flew back to Lagos on Monday morning. That evening, she received a message from him, a photograph of her mother sitting up in bed, smiling, holding a cup of tea. He had stopped in Lagos on his way home. He had gone to see Mama Mensa without being asked. Zita looked at that photograph for a long time. She felt two things at once: warmth for a man who knew her family the way only a lifetime of friendship produced, and something else, something quieter, something she couldn't name. She put her phone down and went back to work. Monday morning, Jiang Minyu arrived at the office and on his desk. Before anything else was a single photograph, security footage, Zita and Chitty at dinner Sunday evening, Chitty's hand across the table close to hers. Nobody had sent it. It had been placed there overnight. Minyu looked at it. His jaw tightened once, a movement so small only someone watching very carefully would catch it. He closed the photograph inside the folder. He did not mention it. He went through his entire day without mentioning it. But that afternoon, he approved Zita's request for a private office workspace upgrade she had submitted 6 weeks earlier and forgotten about. It arrived the following morning. After that, something shifted in the air between them. He began appearing outside his usual patterns. In the lobby when she arrived in the morning, checking his phone, leaving at the same time she was walking in. At the coffee station at the same moment she was there. Leaving the building in the evening precisely when she was, never forcing a conversation, never manufacturing a moment, just present, exactly where she was. He was always where she was. She noticed. She noticed the way you notice weather, not all at once but gradually, until one morning you realize the temperature has changed, and you cannot say exactly when it happened. She started choosing her outfits more carefully in the morning. She did not examine this too closely. She simply chose more carefully and arrived at work and was excellent at her job and told herself there was nothing to examine. Yuna found her alone in the break room on a Wednesday afternoon. She closed the door. She sat across from Zita with the expression of a woman who had decided something. Then she looked at Zita with something that was not quite cruelty. It was closer to the look of a woman who had wanted something for a long time and had finally accepted she was not going to get it. She said in English, "I spent 3 years being the person his family wanted beside him. I was the right family, the right background, everything they wanted on paper." She paused. And then he read a file from Lagos and none of it mattered anymore. Zita said nothing. Yuna said, "You should understand what you are in the middle of before it goes any further." Zita said, "Then tell me what I'm in the middle of." Yuna looked at her for a moment. Then she said, "Ask him what his wife's name is." She stood up and walked out. Zita sat with her coffee and said nothing. She was very still. She was the stillest she had been since she arrived in Seoul. That evening, she sat at her desk in the office long after everyone had gone. She had access to the firm's legal database. She needed it regularly for document verification. She typed his name into the public registry search. No wife mentioned anywhere, in any publication, any public record, any interview he had ever given, and he had given very few. Nothing. She went deeper. Korean Civil Registry records through the legal system's access portal. She found it. A marriage registration, filed 5 years ago. Quiet. No ceremony on record, no public announcement. The wife's name, Mensa Zita. She read it once. Then she scrolled up and read it from the beginning again. Then she stopped at the name. Her name. She read it a third time the way you read something when your brain keeps rejecting it, looking for the error, the misprint, the rational explanation hiding just behind the letters. Her passport number was there. A passport she had renewed 4 years ago in Lagos. Her passport number in a document she had never seen, in a registry office she had never entered, beneath a signature she had never given. She recognized the shape of her own signature, the way the M in Mensa started, the particular lean of her Z. Whoever had done this had been careful. It almost looked right. Her fingers stopped moving on the trackpad. She closed the laptop, sat in the silence of the empty office. Then she opened it again because some part of her needed to confirm it was still there, that she had not imagined it, and it was still there. Mensa Zita. Her name, in his marriage registry, 5 years old. She sat in the empty office with the soul night spread out beyond the glass, and she looked at her own name, and she understood, for the first time, the full size of the folder she had been refusing to open. She did not go home. She sat at her desk for 40 minutes. She answered 3 emails that had come in after hours. She reorganized a section of the filing system she had been meaning to address. She was precise and methodical and completely functional. Then she stood up. She picked up her bag. She walked to his office. She knocked once. She opened the door. She stepped inside and closed it behind her. She crossed the room and placed the printed registry document on his desk. He looked at it, 2 seconds, then at her. He did not look surprised. She had expected surprise. The absence of it told her everything and nothing simultaneously. She said, "Explain this." Silence, long enough that anyone else would have filled it. She didn't. He said, "Which part?" She said, "All of it." He stood. He walked to the window. He was quiet for long enough that she thought he might simply refuse. And then he spoke. He told her about the pressure, the board, his family, the lawyer, the contact, the forged signature. He spoke without apology and without performance, just the plain architecture of what had happened, and she listened without moving. When he finished, she said, "When did you find out?" He said, 6 months after it was filed. She said, "And you had it annulled." He said nothing. The room was completely still. She said, "You didn't have it annulled." He turned from the window. He looked at her directly, that look, the one she had been receiving for a year without knowing how to name it. He said, "No." She said, "Why?" A long pause, the longest pause she had ever heard from him. Then he said, "Because by the time I found out, I had already read your file, and I didn't want to." She stood with that. Her face was still. Her hands were still. Inside she was anything but. She said, "What does that mean?" He walked back toward his desk but didn't sit. He leaned against it, the closest thing to uncertain she had ever seen him, and he looked at her the way he always looked at her. He said, 2 years before you arrived in Seoul, your name came to me through a business contact in Lagos, a professional profile, a formality. He sends them for everyone he recommends." He paused. "I read yours more carefully than I needed to." She said, "How carefully?" He said, "Carefully enough to build a position that didn't exist before I read it." She said, "The posting was written for me." "Yes." "Before you contacted any agency." 3 months before. She absorbed this. Then, "My mother." He said, "That started the day I read your file." Her voice stayed level, steady, the way it always stayed. She said, "The apartment." He nodded. "The tea." "Once." "The restaurant note." "Once." "Park Junho." "Once." She said, "You have been arranging my life since before I arrived." He said, "I have been protecting it." She said, "Without telling me." He said, "Yes." She said, "Why didn't you tell me?" He was quiet for a moment that stretched long enough to hurt. Then he said, "Because I needed you to come on your own terms, not because of anything I had done. I needed you to choose Seoul, to choose the work. He stopped, started again. I didn't want what I had done to be the reason you stayed. I wanted you to stay because you chose to. She looked at him, a long time, she said, and you were just going to wait. He said, I was waiting for you to see it yourself. She said, see what? He said, that you were never here by accident. She left his office. She took the elevator to the rooftop. October, 1 year exactly from when she had arrived. The Han River was lit below her, and Seoul glittered in every direction, and she stood in the middle of all of it, and she didn't call anyone. She just stood there. She thought about the tea on the counter that first morning, how she had filed it away because she couldn't explain it, and she was not a woman who dwelt on things she couldn't explain. She had a job to do. She thought about the restaurant note placed in the center of her desk, how she had gone anyway and eaten the egusi and felt, for 1 hour in a foreign city, completely at home, and then filed that away too. She thought about her mother's voice on the phone. Much better, my daughter. How she had sat on the floor of her hallway and breathed and then stood back up and kept going because that was what she did. She kept going. She filed things and she kept going. She had been filing for a year. The frightening part was not that he had kept all of it secret. The frightening part was that she had felt every single piece of it. She had felt it land. She had felt the shape of it, the care inside it, the specificity of it, the patience of it, and she had called it coincidence. Every single time she had called it coincidence. Because she had never once believed she was the kind of woman who warranted that kind of quiet, deliberate, patient certainty. She had spent her entire life being the certainty for everyone else. Her mother, her family, every employer she had ever made look better than they were. She was the foundation. She was not someone for whom foundations were laid. And yet, 2 years before she ever boarded a plane to Seoul, a man she had never met had read her file and decided, with no performance, no announcement, no expectation of gratitude, that she was worth building something for, that her comfort mattered, that her mother mattered, that she deserved to arrive somewhere and feel, from the very first morning, like she had always been expected. She stood on that rooftop in the October cold, and she let herself feel the full size of it, not swept away by it, not undone by it, just present inside it. For the first time in a very long time, fully present inside something that was being offered to her. Then she straightened her jacket, and she took the elevator back down. She walked into his office. He was exactly where she had left him, standing at his desk, not sitting, as though sitting would mean something had been resolved, and he was not prepared to assume that. She sat down across from him. He waited. He was very good at waiting. She said, I want 3 things. He said, tell me. She said, my mother stays in that hospital on your foundation's account, for as long as she needs it. That does not end regardless of anything else. He said, done. She said, my salary doubles effective the 1st of next month. Don't make me negotiate it. He said, done. She said, and you never make a decision about my life again without telling me first. Not the apartment, not the restaurant, not transfers or hospitals or anything else. You tell me, we decide together or you don't do it. Silence. He looked at her for a long moment. This was the longest pause. She held his gaze and did not fill it. He said, done. She stood. She smoothed the front of her jacket. She said, then I'm not resigning. She walked back to her desk. He stood at his office door and watched her sit down and open her laptop and begin working with the same clean precision she brought to everything. The same steadiness. Except she was different now. She was carrying something different now, and he had watched her long enough to know the difference. For the first time in the entire story, he almost smiled. She didn't know if what he felt was love. Not yet. That was a word that required more time and more space, and more of the kind of honesty they were both still learning how to offer. She didn't know if what she felt had a name. She knew that something in her had been unlocked by the knowledge that someone had seen her, fully, specifically, completely, before she had arrived. That her capability had not gone unnoticed. That her steadiness had not been taken for granted. That somewhere, a man who said very little and moved through the world like someone who already knew the ending had read her file and decided. With the kind of quiet certainty she had spent her whole life providing for other people, that she was worth every secret he had kept. She had walked into that office as his assistant. She had walked out as something he had never been able to file away. And for a woman who had spent her whole life being the one who held everything together alone, being someone's certainty felt like the most terrifying and extraordinary thing she had ever let herself keep. If you felt seen watching her story, this channel was built for you. Hit subscribe so you never miss a woman choosing herself. And if you want to know what happened when his family discovered that the name on that marriage certificate had stopped being paperwork and started being something neither of them could file away anymore, that story is already waiting for you.